Hello, welcome back. It's Roger Royce, host of the 10,000 Startups podcast. I'm also a partner with Haynes Boone, Emerging Growth and Venture Capital in Palo Alto. And today we are going to talk about a topic that's really probably long overdue, and it has to do with crypto, and in particular, the taxation of crypto and tokens and digital assets. And I have with us here today as our speaker, James Creech, who is very much known as an authority on the tax aspects of crypto in this space. So James, and by the way, James is with Baker Tilly in San Francisco, I believe. So thanks for being here, James. And maybe we can just dive into it. I know there's some updates and I want to get to that. But before we do that, just to sort of level set here and kind of put everybody on the same place, I wonder if we can just spend a few minutes talking about some of the basics, tax basics of crypto and tokens. So I'm going to assume everybody in the audience knows what I'm talking about when I talk about crypto and digital assets generally. And in my mind, as a lawyer, I divide them into securities and then the non-securities part, like the Bitcoin, the ones that are used like cash. So let's talk about the non-securities, the one that are used more like currency. So I think of well, I don't know if they're currency, more like a store of value, I guess. But I can use it like currency. So let's suppose I go out and I buy some Bitcoin and I use it to buy. I mean, I don't know if anyone's using it to buy property anymore, but suppose that I did do that. I know that if I pay with a dollar, even though the dollar might have been worth 90 cents when I earned it, and now it's worth more than that, I don't get taxed on any gain in that dollar, that US dollar anyway. What happens if I pay for something with Bitcoin?
Yeah, and thank you for having me, Roger. This is such a fun topic for me, and it's what I really love about like taxation and crypto is like you're defined by an expert as like what you don't know, right? It's like the experts say like, hold on, this is weird. There's lots of unknowns here, and if you have certain answers in crypto, like that may not be the best. That may not be who you want to talk to. Because there's weird stuff all over the place. But I do know the answer to this, so I'm going to just disregard everything I said. Um, I like to think of like let's just say Bitcoin. Like I think one of the better analogies I've heard of Bitcoin is it's just digital gold, right? It because it's property. Like we know that from the IRS. There's a notice 2014-21, which we're only a couple days past Bitcoin Pizza Day. I mean, it's a lot closer to Bitcoin Pizza Day than it is current day. So it stood the test of time. So if I buy something with Bitcoin, um, I have to track some stuff. I've got to track like when I got the Bitcoin, what I paid for it, what's my basis, and then what's the fair market value of what I exchanged it for. So, let's just say I got my Bitcoin back when, Bitcoin Pizza Day happened. It was worth, 5 cents a coin. I've now held it forever and I'm going to exchange one Bitcoin for, um, a piece of property worth $70,000. Um, I basically have to pay capital gains, long-term capital gains on my $70,000 of price appreciation on this. Um, and so, the problem with some of that is now, like if I'm in the 50% bracket or, state and state, federal, and like, top bracket of California, and let's just say I'm in 50%, like my cost is not, my cost in tax is $35,000 on that transaction of Bitcoin. So I don't just do a one for one Bitcoin for property worth $70,000. Now I've got to pay $35,000 in tax on it. So taxes can be really onerous here because a lot of times you don't have the cash to match it. And crypto to crypto transactions are taxable. So if I'm not buying property or something I can touch, but rather I'm going to exchange my Bitcoin, my low basis Bitcoin for Solana, like now I've got a tax bill and all I have is Solana and I don't necessarily have the cash. So like tax is a huge drag in this area. Um, and I'm just going to give a plug to not getting your tax advice for crypto off Reddit or TikTok. Um, because sometimes there's easy answers there that aren't necessarily true.
Right. So you don't think there's a 1031 aspect to if I buy Solana with Bitcoin or something like that?
Uh, I mean, generally, no. I mean, the right now, post Tax Cut and Jobs Act, 1031s are only for property. I think there were some open questions prior to that. There might still be some open questions at state level. Um, but we're in California, so the California 1031 often has lower income thresholds for it. Um, and I think that there's some depth there, but I think generally no. And I think that you've also got to kind of gauge risk tolerances with crypto. And if I'm going to if I'm going to engage in behavior that's going to be deemed as riskier, I want to know it, and I want to know that like I'm going to take this position. And if I'm going to be really risky, I want to have paperwork that says like, yeah, you're taking a position. Um, you know, this isn't necessarily what the IRS might say, but here's your rationale for it.
Right. Now,
And
so
so,
just for the
go ahead,
audience,
go ahead. Sorry.
so sorry to interrupt, but for the audience, when we say 1031, so in the tax law, 1031 is a like kind exchange provision. You most often see it in real estate. Kind of everybody knows you can trade real estate for real estate, and not get taxed because there's a code section that says like kind property for like kind property is not taxable. But then there's some exceptions, and up until the recent tax law change, some of us thought we could fit different types of crypto digital assets into those exceptions, and there was a lot of chatter about it. And in fact, James and I even co-authored a paper on this. And now for federal purposes, though, Congress has plugged that hole. So not something we can rely on anymore, correct?
Yeah, and I mean, in case our third co-author is listening, I mean, there is like a little bit of light at the tunnel, especially for like state purposes. But
Right.
again, when you're looking at the tax hit, you know, saving on state taxes is sometimes cold comfort for the higher federal rates you might have to pay as well.
Yeah, you might be able to take that position for state, but certainly not for federal anymore. And our third co-author was Annette Nellen, by the way, in case anybody's wondering. So given the environment now, the tax law really, really discourages the idea that cryptocurrency could ever be a currency, right? I mean, it just closes that door that we can ever use it to buy stuff because we're going to get taxed every time we buy stuff. It sounds like it's so the tax law has been a huge driver in this market, it seems like to me. Don't you think
Yeah,
so?
and I think one of the sorry, this is a little bit wonkish, so everybody's gonna have to forgive me, but like one of the crazy things about like crypto taxation is like there's really no laws on it. Like so the property analogy comes from an internal IRS memo. And like no one has ever litigated like is this currency? And if you took a position as currency, like you've got to go all the way, you're going to have to go all the way to trial at a federal court to prove this. And I mean, there have been people that have been willing to do that, and for certain areas like the Jarretts, right? The Jarretts took a position that, staking rewards weren't taxable until I received them, not when they were earned. And they were willing to go and try and sue the government for a refund based upon that position. Um, and it's like they were willing to go really far to make a point for other people, because I think the Jarretts only had something like a $6,000 refund, and you know they spent a lot more on legal fees than they did um, on actually getting their money back. But crypto tax is full of those areas, right? It's just
How did
undefined.
that turn out, by the way? Are staking proceeds or income?
So the IRS will take the position that they are income when they're received. So if I
Mhm.
have the right to this income, even if it's sitting in a staking pool and I haven't received it back out, the safest treatment is that it's current income when I'm eligible for the rewards. And kind of when I see my ETH balance go up, like that's taxable income. Um, the Jarretts really wanted it, so it was only taxable when it came out of the staking pool. Um, and they sued for a refund. They ultimately got their refund on the theory that the government just didn't want to fight them anymore. And I mean, it's kind of an undefined area at this point, but I think the safest way is just to take at his current income when it's received. And there's some IRS guidance that says that as well. So,
Um, yeah, so okay, that makes sense. So some other issues that come up, getting a little away from crypto more to digital assets generally, it feels like almost everybody can issue their own digital asset and their own token now. And we don't do that in the US anymore like we used to. The securities laws basically made it, has chased that whole industry offshore, for better or worse. But you do have US persons who will want to make an investment now and buy tokens. And oftentimes they'll do that through this instrument that's been around for a long time called a SAFT, Simple Agreement for Future Token. And I'll get the securities experts on here to opine on whether that's even allowed under US securities laws. But for the most part, most people think it is, and they use it. So you buy the SAFT when a token is worth almost nothing, and then you convert it into a token when it's worth quite a lot. And you got in at this super cheap price. And I don't know anybody who is picking up income on that transaction. Do you have a view on
I thought we were all getting softballs, Roger. It's
that?
you know it it's a tough one, right? The question of it, do you have gain on, because really it's a forward contract, right? It's a forward contract for a future delivery of tokens. And,
Yeah.
um, you know, I don't know if I have a clear answer or that, but like I can see where like, look, I don't have, I'm taking delivery of this and I don't necessarily like my basis is probably equivalent to when I received the tokens, not necessarily the contract that generated the right to. And so I don't have a realization event when I actually take possession of the tokens, right?
Yeah,
Because I
that'd be
don't,
the position I would take. I mean, we do that with safes all the time, right? And but then there's other theories. You could say that's really that's a reorg, right? It's a type E, or you could say you can rely on basically you're just buying property at a discount in a non-compensatory arena. So now let's change the facts and let's suppose that person is like an employee of the company, because now it looks more like an option, right? So now we may have a problem.
yeah, and I worry about that a lot more. This is something I see with fair regularity, and especially with like people who are putting in efforts for some of the token projects or
Hmm.
something that is denominated in value by a token, or you get crypto rewards for your employment.
Hmm.
Um, I think you really kind of have to back up and say, like, well, what am I, like, why am I eligible for this? Like, what's my labor? Am I getting this because I'm putting in the work? Am I doing a development? Um, I think the IRS is very aggressive in saying, like, if it's your labor that's generating these, then it's, going to be income to you at ordinary rates. I mean, we have a mechanism through kind of an 83B election to kind of turn some of that labor into capital rates for securities. And I've certainly heard people say you can do an 83B for crypto. Um, it's again gray. Like I wouldn't just do it by yourself. I'd probably want some help on that. Um, but a
Yeah,
lot of this is kind of the Wild West. I mean, because
right.
ultimately, if it's a token grant, um, that's based upon your employment, I mean, theoretically, you should be paying employment. There should be employment taxes paid. It should be rolled into your W-2. Um, you know, it's going to be ordinary down the road. I mean, there's a lot of kind of corollary effects from happen from this. Where if it is a true forward contract, I mean, that could be very different. And
Right. I had that scenario come up many times as well. You have an employee of one of these crypto companies, I don't want to mention any names, and they were given these huge grants of tokens as they go along, and huge grants, and they're worth way up here. But by the time they were actually able to liquidate them and get cash out of them, they're worth something much less. Well, they got compensation income for a big number. Now they got a non-deductible capital loss for a small number, right?
well, I mean, these conversations are much easier to have when like if we're at a bull market, right? It's if you've been issued a token and the value's gone up and it's in the money and you're able to sell it and it's liquid, those are much less painful than like, oh, we got a big tax bill and now the value of this project is half or gone to zero. But you still got a realization event when you had a value. And
Right, right.
um and
Yeah,
value in crypto is not easy because our traditional analysis is the value is a fair market value or what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller with a reasonable knowledge of the facts.
yeah,
And it's hard to go back and say like, oh, I know CoinGecko says that there was a price for this, but there was really no fair market value, and we're going to be making that argument 2 years later. And I mean, sometimes that's the right argument, especially if it's a thinly traded token or there was some indication that like there was some market manipulation or something like that.
mhm,
Fair market value is not exactly easy in this space, especially when you don't know who controls the wallets that were trading the crypto at the price it was being reported at.
yeah. So, a few years ago, the IRS put out a notice related to airdrops and hard forks, which generally caused a lot of discussion in the community.
I'm
I
I'm
think,
I'm gonna probably shouldn't say this. This is how you know it's gonna be good when you say that like you shouldn't say this. But that was a terrible piece of guidance. Like that was one of the worst pieces of guidance I think I've ever seen come out of the IRS.
tell me more. Well,
It
first of all,
doesn't
can you
even
describe what an airdrop and a hard fork is first?
so basically it said that, and this is back. Well, first of all, it was like 2 years too late because the hard forks were a big thing in 2017, 2018 with Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Satoshi's version. Um, and so they issued it after the hype had died down. Um, and then they said that if it's a hard fork followed by an airdrop, which I've never really actually seen a hard fork followed by an airdrop. I've just seen hard forks. Um, you have income at the fair market value of what the fork was for the new coin, and then that fair market value becomes your new basis. Um, but I mean, I think it's a crummy piece of um, guidance because it lets a third party give me income. Like, so if I airdrop, and you can't see me, but I'm doing hand quotes. If I air, Roger, if I airdrop you my like personal meme coin that's trading for a certain price, like you may not want it, you may not want to claim it, but now you've got a tax bill because I chose to airdrop you something.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't think that's very fair. But
Right. Yeah. Um, Yeah, there certainly was a lot of discussion about that, and we were all arguing by analogy, but I like your argument the best. It just seems sort of unfair that you can just all of a sudden have income with no action on your part.
no action on my part, no ability to kind of disclaim it, no ability to kind of say I don't want this token or I
Yeah.
think this token's a fraud because like I've got to use my private key to sign in to transfer it. And now my private key is out there. A lot of these forks, weren't tradable in the US. You had to rely on exchange. I don't think there was any consideration in that. And I also think that like, they created two classes of citizens. If I held my crypto at Coinbase or somebody else that's a custodian wallet and they chose not to recognize it, I didn't have hard fork income or airdrop income. But if I held it in a cold wallet, all of a sudden I've got income I can't do anything about. And, you
Mhm.
know, I can
Yeah.
go on and on, but you probably don't want to hear me gripe about something, a 2019 Rev ruling.
Yeah, let's move on to what's going on now. I want to get to some of what's new in crypto. Any new developments, anything we ought to all be aware of?
So the biggest thing that's kind of on the horizon is Congress passed a law basically mandating um, basis reporting for broker dealers and other crypto people. It's very broad. It even includes potentially and most likely somebody like Uniswap that doesn't actually, they link up people, right? They don't actually facilitate the transfers. They just host a peer-to-peer um, site. Um, but they might get lumped into this too. Um, but basically, you're going to get like a 1099 DA, kind of like you would get a 1099B from a broker. Um, right now, like you've got to get one for each and every crypto transaction. I think the IRS has said when this comes into play in 2025, they're expecting something like 6 billion 1099 DAs a year. Um, and they're all going to be wrong because they won't have basis on them. They won't have the correct basis on them. Um, so right now we've got a pretty difficult system where if you're trading on a platform, you basically get you get a report or you get a CSV file and that you turn into a tax report through a tax tracking software.
So let me
And they're
pause on that for a second. So you're on an exchange and you're trading crypto. You're saying that starting in 2025, the exchange is going to give you a 1099 that reports your transactions and they're going to report that to the IRS. Is that right?
right, but they're not going to give me one. If I'm trading 3,000 times, they're going to give me 3,000. And so I'm going to get 3,000 wrong 1099s. Then I'm going to have to figure out what to do with them. And it's going to be miserable for like the first 5 years. I mean, until there's enough volume traded on exchanges that they can track the basis on, like they're just not going to be usable. And like even when they're there, if I'm getting 3,000 of them because they've got to issue one 1099 DA per transaction, like that's still not going to be very usable. I think over time it'll be better than what we have now, but the key word there is over time, and in the short to medium term, it's like I have no idea what the IRS is going to do with all of them. I mean, they're probably going to throw them in the trash for the first 5 years because that's about the value of them.
Yeah. Well,
Like I can tell you how I really feel if you want me to, Roger.
I can see this totally overwhelming the IRS computers, given all the other initiatives
Well,
they've got.
I mean, the problem, like, it's ultimately going to be a better thing, especially if you're on a centralized exchange, because like you're not going to have the variation. Even you know, I'm going to pick on Coinbase because they're one of the good guys, and I know they take efforts to get it right. But like the Coinbase tax report's based on a highest in, first out basis. Um, you know, some other exchanges might be on a first in, first out. And what we do know from Notice 2014-21 is it says you've got to use a consistent accounting method. And so right now we kind of get a jumble of different reports that you then have to put into commercial tracking software to get something that's even mostly usable. Um, and even mostly usable is probably wrong somewhere. The question is just how material is it? And how much time and effort could you really go back getting reports from every single wallet you used and matching up, your download history from OpenSeas, to your basis from, you know, Coinbase for your ETH are you going to have, I mean, I've seen a lot of them where you have like $5,000 of gains during the year, but your compliance cost of figuring out where your 3,000 transactions went could be $15,000. And it's like, that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, yeah. So there'll be some tough times ahead till we iron out all the friction in the process. Well, I know you've got a time constraint here, so I want to thank you. We've kind of scratched the surface of all of the things we could talk about. This is Roger Roy's 10,000 Startups. I've been speaking with James Creech from Baker Tilly about taxation of crypto. Thank you again, James, for being here and for
Well,
doing.
maybe this is a teaser to have me come back. So, but this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Bye now.